I'll meet more of you afterwards, and I want to thank you. But I want to say thank you to everyone that I've met here. I will probably not remember all the names, but Rose Morosco, Debbie Laughlin, Carolyn, Patty, Kim Grant, Stephen Walsh, Joe, the guy at the dorm where I've been staying, the maintenance guy. I rent a room here, a dorm room. I'm getting the whole USM experience when I'm here. I hope I didn't leave anyone out, but I also really want to thank the students that I've met with. Well, the students that took a class with me, they took a leap of faith. They didn't know me. Who's this weirdo from Boston? We don't know her. But I want to say they worked their hearts out, and I'm very proud of all of them. And you can see their work in the hallway, and I hope you'll check it out. There will be a closing reception for the work next Thursday, I think from 3 to 5, although a lot of them are going to be on a field trip with Rose, so they won't be able to be there. But I'll be there, happy to answer questions or after this. And so I guess that's basic. Oh, I have one other piece of news, which is I've told a number of people. My brother's stepson, so I guess he's my step-nephew, is going to be a student here next fall. He's going to be in the music department, and they've already put a deposit to be in this dorm, the arts dorm. So it's, and when my piece is ready for the collection, and I think there's going to be a show in the fall, so I called my brother last night and said, we'll all have to meet up at USM again. So I hope I'll see some of you again there, which will be good. So I hope I thanked everyone, and I don't know if there's anything else, but I've really enjoyed being here. And I'll come next week one more time. I'll be here Thursday and Friday. I go to Gideon Bach's class. If anyone here is in Gideon Bach's class, I'll be here in the morning. So I'm looking forward to it. I think that's it. I guess we should start. Do I have to turn this on? Oh, it's on? Okay, so I guess we should turn the lights on. What I'm going to do is talk to you about my work. I work with pinhole cameras, and I'll tell you a bit about my ideas and how they come to be, and you'll see me also in the studio. Some of the students here went to my studio on a field trip, which was a lot of fun, and so some of it will be familiar to them. Okay, I don't think this is on. Oh, I'm not going to get it. Okay. Oh, that's it. Books. Okay, some of the things I work with are fast being phased out, or certainly being contemplated in a new way because the world is going digital. Books and film. They're a recurring film theme for me. You'll see them. I'm very interested in reading poetry and different articles, and I'm going to read this aloud to you because it also helps me when I talk about my work. It's from a wonderful book, The Way of All Flesh, The Romance of Ruins by Midas Dekkers, who's a Dutch biologist. A photograph is a tangible memory. That's why it's wrong to paste photographs into albums. Nothing makes you feel better than loose photographs floating around in an old shoebox, groping around in your memory, rummaging through it until you come across something you no longer knew you knew. For people and animals long since dead come alive in you again. The most exciting pictures are those where the dead are standing next to the still living. It creates a bond. And you might see some of these ideas. When I read this, I was so excited because I had been thinking about these things. And you will see how they come to pass. And the handmadeness of photography is very important to me. And you can see that in the show. Okay, you might be thinking, oh, why this 1782 painting? Well, you might have seen it before, but my theory is, and many people have this as well, that photography came to be because people wanted to have a picture of someone they loved and held dear after that person was no longer present. And this is a famous painting. This is a young Greek woman, and her lover, boyfriend, whatever he is going off to war, and she doesn't know if he's going to come back. And he's fallen asleep. There's a light up here, and she is tracing his silhouette, exactly like the silhouettes that Rose just showed for the card. His silhouette on the wall with a piece of charcoal so that she can remember him. This is before photography, but she wanted to remember him. Photography, as you know, means writing with light. So she was doing that. In a sense of pre-photography, she was writing with light. And then in the 19th century, you're probably aware of this, there was a lot of infant mortality. And many people, and this might strike us as odd, but at the time it was very important. People would take their deceased baby, oftentimes a child, and have the child photographed. And it's called post-mortem photography, after-death photography. So here's this mother, and her lovely little baby has died, but she has a picture. so she can look at it. And so this was an early daguerreotype, and she could, or you know, it might be a tintype, it looks like a daguerreotype with some hand coloring, so she could remember that. And people also, of course, died at all ages. And what's interesting is, early on, before photography, people did watercolor miniatures of the deceased, or it could be just you're on a trip, maybe the person that you're thinking about is still alive, but you want to be able to look at them and think about them. They would do watercolor paintings on ivory. And then, interestingly, when photography, and it would be a locket that you would wear around your neck. This was a famous story about a bride in Charleston who mysteriously died the night before her wedding, and this was a painting done of her. But that locket form is echoed in this post-mortem daguerreotype of a young woman, and you can see on flowers, she has flowers in her wreath there, her little headdress, and she has a rose, kind of that idea, you know, plucked too soon before they could really come into fruition. But I think also it's very interesting that in both cases, and also with the little baby, they don't look dead, whatever dead looks like, but there's no sign of pain, it's very peaceful, and it's as if the person were sleeping. And this is pretty intense to think that you would actually take someone's corpse to a photo studio, because there weren't portable cameras. You went to the photographer and have that person photographed so that you could remember them after they were gone. And you know, here are other examples. You know, this lady, she's chosen to have herself photographed with the portrait. It's probably her husband who died. So she's telling the world, yes, I had my husband, he's not here anymore, but here's a picture of him. And then it gets even more obvious with this setting where you've got the image of the person in a funerary monument. And it could be, a lot of these came up because of the Civil War. A lot of people went to war and never came back. So it was really important to have a picture. And it could be a brother, husband, somebody who went to war and didn't come back. And that's called a cenotaph, when you have a memorial without the body. And so in a sense, a photograph can be that. Okay, I don't want you to think I'm morbid or anything, but I have a theory that photography and taxidermy are related, because they both, I mean, these are all little taxidermied specimens, and you'll see at least one of them show up again in a pinhole photo. They do the same thing, that you're trying to capture something that was once alive and present it as if it were still alive, but it isn't. And you also have this is me in the early 80s, I don't remember the date. You know, that's how I looked then. This is how I look now. Where's that person? She doesn't exist anymore. She only exists in photographs. So she appears alive, just like this, you know, these taxidermy specimens. But we know they're not. It's a fiction. And so I have this little theory about photography and taxidermy. And so this is a self-portrait, starting in with my pinhole work. This is from '93, and you might recognize that taxidermy hair. And everything is staying very still, except for me, because I'm still alive and I'm breathing. And that's why it's the exposure, I remember it well. It was 45 minutes in my studio, and you know, so I'm still alive and moving, but everything else is still and not. I know a lot of people here are pinhole experts now, but in case you're not, you're thinking, I don't know what a pinhole camera is or what it's about. It's based on a simple principle. This is not a pinhole camera, but it looks like one, which is that light moves in straight lines. So whatever in the outside world is light bounces off it. It travels in straight lines. If you have a camera, which is simply another room for a word for a room, a darkened chamber and a little hole, those lines of light will go through, and as they go in, they cross over, and that's why you get a upside down and backwards latent image of the back of the camera or the room. And we were talking this morning in Rose's class about the idea of the latent image. At the time, you know, in 1544, when this drawing was done, there was no film. But if this is like a cutaway version of a pinhole camera, if you had film back here, it would capture that image, and it would be latent until we developed it. Of course, digital photography is way beyond this, but this is, you know, going back to the film era, which we're still in. And this is one of my first pinhole cameras. You can see how sophisticated it is. It has a handle. It's an old typewriter case. There's a hole drilled there with a little piece of shim stock with a pinhole in it, and that's, I call it a lens cap, but there's no lens, but it's just easy to say. It's a piece of black tape. and it was a great camera. And here's some other ones. Same deal, hole cut through, and there's the little pinhole right there and the sophisticated lens cap. This is a handy one. It's got a handle. It looks kind of, I call it the desk drawer camera. It's not, I should say, it takes 11 by 14 film. So I'm working with large format film. I like to think of these as kind of a recipe for the kind of work I do. It requires large format film, interior daylight. I like to work inside, which I've been doing over in the studio here, which is very nice, beautiful windows. Pinhole camera. You need time, lots of time. Sometimes my exposures are measured in hours, not milliseconds. And then imagination, whatever you feel like doing. We were talking again this morning about Polaroid film. I guess it's been revived. There was someone, who was it? It was you, yes. Was working with the new Polaroid, but I was working with the old Polaroid. And they had a great program where they would invite artists to work with their film. They would give you the film, and then, but in return, you had to give them some images, which was very nice. They had a nice collection, which unfortunately has been disbanded. But I worked a lot with Polaroid Type 55. I know Rose did too. We were talking about it. And this is kind of a typical setup in my studio, working with the window behind me. This is a setup which shows you again how just primitive and simple everything is. This was working in Greece on an island called Skopelos. What I did was I went to Athens to the flea market and bought, well, these books came from the museum there, but I bought old books, and then I had my Polaroid film and a film back, and then a 4x5 pinhole camera. And this is my extremely sophisticated tripod, which it's just, I don't use a tripod or anything like that. I like to just set things up and then have the camera right next to it. And I should say right now that I'm not from a photo background. A lot of times people say, oh, you're a photographer, but I think of myself as an artist who uses photography. I mean, I feel honored to be called a photographer, but I didn't really study photography, but I find it an extremely useful tool for what I'm trying to do. So, and I also say that, don't be shy if there's something that you want to work with. Just jump in and you can learn, and people will teach you or teach yourself, and you can invent your own way. And this is the kind of image that I was getting there. The Polaroid film has this little border because you peel the negative away from the positive, and then I would use the negatives to print with cyanotype, which a lot of people in the room know how to do very well. It's a 19th century printing process where you take a piece of artist paper and you make it light sensitive by brushing on a solution. We have a bunch of very good examples in the hallway. And then a lot of times, I don't typically photograph, have my work just, in a film, in a frame. I often will put it in a context of gluing it to an old book or with found objects, just different things that somehow, I call them photo objects. It just gives them a little more, I don't know, to me a little more richness. I'm very interested in when I found something that somebody else has left behind. For example, somebody had been practicing their calligraphy on that sheet of paper, and it just, the shapes in it really worked for me with the shapes in this raccoon skull, and there's an image of a human skull and the shape of Eve's stomach and this architectural element. So I'm very interested. You have a great bookstore in Portland. Yes, Books. I know some of you have been there, and I got some things there that I've been working with in the studio here. I don't know if you know about this camera, the Polaroid 2024 camera. At the time, there were 5 of them. I think more people have built them, but they're just huge, giant cameras. They weigh about 250 pounds because they have big steel rollers inside to compress the film and pop the chemistry pods. Right here is the bellows, which extends to about 3 to 4 feet. But we took the lens off. It was a big lens. We put a pinhole in and compressed the bellows, so we have a very short focal length. And the camera at the time, I think it still is there, was at Mass College of Art, and that camera doesn't go to you unless you're William Wegman. So everyone else has to go to it. I'm assuming you guys know William Wegman's work. Do you know him? You might have seen his work. It's a lot of those dogs, Weimaraners, dressed up like he's done Alice in Wonderland and Sleeping Beauty and all kinds of things with his dogs. So he's extremely famous, and so the camera would go to him. But anyone else, you go to the camera. And this is one of the images I did there. And for the pinhole people, I made my, my aperture in the metal foil with a push pin, you know, so it was kind of a big aperture. And then I would just set things up, and I couldn't work with natural light. We had to work with actual lights and reflectors and stuff, and the exposures were about 45 minutes. There's a person who was running the camera, there's someone else now, but his name was Tracy Storer. He was very good at it, and he figured it all out. And I should also say that I'm not good on technical things, like f-stops and things like that, but luckily he was, so it worked out very well. He knew the camera well. And this was another exposure we did another time. And Polaroid was very generous. They gave me, you know, a day with Tracy and X number of shots of film. I don't remember how many it was, and then they kept some for their collection. But since my exposures were so long, I had to go back other times and, you know, pay Tracy on my own to do it. Because most people just go and it's, you know, a second or something. Another part of my work process is that I collect and assemble images and objects. I'm always looking because you never know what you might find. And I have a theory, which is that the object finds you as much as you find it. And you probably had that experience where you're just walking along and you find something that's perfect for a project you're working on, because that object is waiting for you. I don't know who this man is. It's an anonymous daguerreotype from the George Eastman House Museum in Rochester, which if you've never been there, I really recommend going. It's a fabulous museum. Again, dedicated to film, which is slowly going away, and Kodak is having problems. I hope I'm not jinxing these companies that you know, Polaroid, now it doesn't work anymore, it's now Kodak. What I like about this image is this gentleman he wants to be presented with his collection. I'm assuming he's a scholar, a butterfly expert, and in fact, I bet he wrote this book because he's holding a pen, and it's a handmade pen made out of feather quill. And I just love everything about this photo. The frame is, you know, heavily object-like. It's a very physical object, and I like that quality in a photograph. It's very different from looking at something on a digital screen. And don't think that I don't do that. I mean, I look at things on the web. It's a very interesting way to see things, but I really like this photo object quality. This is a very famous taxidermy shop in Paris called Desrolles, and I don't know if you know Richard Ross. He's a wonderful photographer who went and photographed many natural history museums, and he photographed here. And this is, again, they collect things. If you ever go there, has anyone been there by any chance? If you go to Paris, I recommend going. If you like taxidermy, it's an amazing place. It's just stuffed with things. And so for someone like me who's interested in things, it's a good place to go. And when I went there, and this is another important thing to, you know, think about, is where do we get our ideas? You know, sometimes it's from reading, sometimes it's from objects, sometimes we just have an idea, we don't know where it comes from. And there was something that happened when I just had this idea that I had to go to Desrolles and I had to find a white bird. I really don't know why, I just sort of had it. And when I was there, I went in, it was very fancy and expensive, and you know, I thought, oh, I can never buy anything, but I thought, well, maybe if they have something that's a little bit broken, or you know, maybe they would sell it to me for less. So I asked them in French, and you'll have to excuse my accent, but I said, est-ce que vous avez un oiseau un peu abîmé? Which means, do you have a bird that's a little bit wrecked? And, you know, like, you know, broken. And they looked at me really weirdly, because they could tell by my accent that I was American, and, you know, why would I want something broken? And they went out and back, and this guy came out, and he looked at me, and they went out and back, and they brought out this bird. And it was an amazing bird. He looks pretty good here, but if you look at the back, he's got blue paint, he has no feet, the tail is broken. You can see in some of the photos, it looked like somebody was learning how to do taxidermy on this bird. So they sold him to me, and I started to work with him. I was staying with a friend. We were staying in a friend's apartment, and I went home, and I had taken some Polaroid film with me, and I started making Polaroids of this bird. And you can see his feathers are looking a little bit questionable right there. he was a very good model. That's another thing about taxidermy, it doesn't move. So I could set this up, and, well, if it does, you're in trouble. I could set this up and just leave it and come back later and the exposure would be done. And I just, I had found this book in an old bookstore and, found these later and glued it on. So there's some sort of sense of history, a book that's been read by someone else, a taxidermy dove that's been owned by someone else, just I'm interested in time and how can you get that into your work. And so I've used this dove a lot. Not so much lately, but for a while I really used him a lot. I don't know what it's male or female, I just say him. And sometimes, I showed you the 11 by 14 camera, and it's the people who took my class know, sometimes when you're coding a sheet of paper to print, you're human, you don't code it like a machine, there might be an error or something. So then you cut out, or at least I do, I cut out the parts that are useful. So this, he was in an 11 by 14 image, but the rest of it wasn't very good. So I just cut this down and then glued it onto this page of sheet music on an old bookboard. And the title is Lieder ohne Worte in German, which is Songs Without Words, which I think is a very interesting title for a taxidermy bird that can't sing anymore. And then I like this idea that by putting them together, that maybe this dove can speak in a new way. And here is why I wanted this white dove, and I didn't know why. This is my grandmother with a dove. She used to raise birds. His name was Dovey. And he had hatched out and imprinted on her. And he would sit on her shoulder or her head. I had completely forgotten about Dovey. That was this little reason that I just had this idea of the white dove. And many years later, another cousin of mine wrote me and said, I found some pictures of your grandmother in an old drawer. How about if I send them to you? And he did, and this was one of them. And it was really weird to open that envelope and see that picture. I just said, that's why I wanted the white dove. And I had no idea. So if you're having an idea that you want to work with, just go with it. You may find that it's going to take you somewhere. Okay, this is, if you came to my studio, which some people in the class, most people in the class did, these are some of the things you might have seen. It looked different, I'm sure, this time. This was from a couple of years ago, but these are objects and things that I've collected and like to work with, like to think about. And then they end up in the pinhole photos and printed as cyanotypes, so they actually look very different. But if you go back, you can see this is a little toy bird from Poznan in Poland. This is an old document that I found in an old antiquarian bookstore in Poland, and then just put them together and they can kind of speak in a new way. Here's some more objects. I often use things over and over. Sometimes I think it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen any Ingmar Bergman movies. He would use the same actors and actresses over and over. And so I have these little objects that I love, and I just kind of find new ways for them to go together. Like you might recognize some of these objects from the previous slide. I mean, these clock spirals I got at an old flea market, I don't even know, maybe 20 years ago. And I still, every once in a while, just fish one out and use them. These are two little doll heads that I've used a number of times. And the other thing about pinhole photography is everything, because it has infinite depth of field, everything is equally in or out of focus, and you can work with things that are very small, get very close up, and you kind of lose a sense of scale. And that's one of the reasons that I like it. Okay, here's another from that series. More objects in my studio. And sometimes people give me things, like this right here is a little wooden head that actually my sister-in-law insisted that I take it. I really didn't want to. I eventually used it, but sometimes people want to give you something and you don't want to hurt their feelings, so you take it. Sometimes you can use it, sometimes not. Okay, you can see this same feather. Someone gave me that feather. I've probably had it for 15 years. Used it many times. As you can see, it's black and white. It's a wonderful thing to use with black and white film. Everything is contact printed, by the way. You'll see that later in my process. This is a possum skull. My sister lives in the woods in South Carolina on a dirt road, and every once in a while I'll just get a package from someone and they'll say, I thought you might like this. And that's what I got. And actually I don't have a picture in this slide group that has that, but I have used it. And same thing, a cousin found this, some kind of a seabird. I've used it a number of times. I think actually in an image you already saw. Oh, actually there it is again. An old book that I found, and I was speaking this morning with Rose's students about the idea, and I think of this with myself a lot, the idea of having a set of rules for yourself. But sometimes we have rules and we break them if it seems important. One of my rules is don't pay more than $5 for a book. But sometimes, this book is a very beautiful book, a 19th century book about birds in North America, and I think it was like $25, and I said, I'm going to have to break my $5 rule because I just knew, and it was this picture, I knew someday I was going to use it, and then eventually I did. So you just, you have to have faith when you find something that you're going to use it, because you probably will. I like to work with different kinds of glues and brushes, different materials, laying things out, what could go together, just kind of piecing things together. And it's funny, I was looking at this and I realized this little piece right here, I just used that recently. I'm involved in a show where 25 artists in Boston, Mass, and 25 artists in Strasbourg, France, we're sister cities. Everyone in Boston did something to a certain size sheet of paper, you send it to France. They do something, send it back, you do something. That's one set of 25. Meanwhile, in France, they started, sent it to us, then they finished it. We're going to have shows in Boston and Strasbourg of this work. And I just realized that little piece of paper was in one of the things that I did. And it was funny seeing it again. So I've had that for years, but finally I could use it. And this is something in process, which I'll later show it to you finished. I often lay things out, and I know it's hard. You guys all have end of the semester and final projects. I know what that's like, because sometimes you need time for your ideas to develop, and sometimes it's good to have that deadline, so you'll finish it. This is a bird. Actually, he doesn't belong to me. A friend loaned him to me. I've used him in many, many photos. And in fact, this little image right here, that's in one of my collages here in the USM gallery. This is a postcard of a painting by Petrus Christus. And we were talking about the Starn twins this morning. They used images of hers. If you look it up on the web, you might see them. So all of these things that, we're all using the same ideas and cycling through them. There's that bird. And this shows you some things about pinhole photographs and time. This bird is very still. And this is a book. It was somebody's bird, I don't know what they're called, a bird watching book where you go out and you take notes in the field. And I found it in an antique store and had it, and it was open, and my window was open because I work right by the window. And everything was still, the taxidermy and everything, except for this page. It just moved probably a little bit as a breeze came in the window, so it was almost like it was breathing and alive, which I think is kind of wonderful because everything else is so still. You can see this bird again. He's been, like the other dove, a very good model. And there are certain elements that I've used many times. And this is a little ball of wire. Carolyn mentioned, I teach at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts. Actually, the museum is next door. We're across the street. And one day I was teaching, and I saw this ball of wire on the floor, and I thought, that is a very beautiful ball of wire. And all day long, I walked by it, and finally I just took it. And I'm so glad I did, because I've used it many, many times. So sometimes there's something there waiting for you that you can use in your work. You can see it again, and here's the image printed in collage with different items. And the same bird in a larger setting. This is from an 8x10 negative. And then there's that little ball of wire and some more of those Polish documents. I very much like the idea of other people's handmade things connected with me or my work. And this is an old book board, handmade. And then a little while ago, I was asked to be in a show called A Novel Idea about people who work with altered books. And I remember thinking, okay, what am I going to do? And it's like having an assignment. It was kind of a good project. So I went to my favorite bookstore in Boston. It's called Brattle Bookshop. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but it's a wonderful place. And I said, I'm going to try to get something that I can work with. So the title is The Little White Bird. And I thought, that's pretty weird. I have all those pictures of the white dove. So I went home, and it was only $5, which was good. I mean, it was expensive, you know. They usually have $1, $3, and $5 books, but it was worth it. So I just went inside the book and just glued most of the pages together. So these are together. And then I took this to the Rebecca Goodale class, for anyone who's in that, and then put some of the pinhole cyanotypes in. So it's kind of reconfiguring the book. But it's all about coincidence or synchronicity, which is kind of an idea of meaningful coincidence or a causal connection, which I think, you know, why would I find that book, The Little White Bird? It's by J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan. It's kind of an early version of Peter Pan. Very odd little book. And there's the dove again. Okay, and over the years, I've been extremely lucky and gone to Poland. Has anyone here been to Poland by any chance? No? Well, I recommend it, especially if you like pinhole photography. They love it there. And I'll just also make a pitch. If you're trying to think of how to get your work out in the world, sometimes it's good if you can fit into a little niche. I fit into many niches, we all do, but one of them is pinhole. And that's been a wonderful way for me to connect with people. And I went to Poland, and actually I think this work is in the show as well. And when I was there for that show, I bought this little stamp. It's in a Polish stamp store, which has, you know, again, I saved it for years, and then it just seemed right to be with that figure. That pinhole photo. And this is that Polish document, one of the pages that I found actually on that trip, and I've been using it for many years. I wish I owned this European magpie. I don't. It's this is from the collection at Harvard Museum of Natural History. There was a very nice guy who ran the ornithology department, and he invited me to come and work with my pinhole cameras there one summer, and I had a great time. But I think my exposures were too long. They got really tired of me coming in and staying for 4 hours and getting one photo. So, but that was one of them I got. It was fun. And then another thing is, if you're looking for ways to get your work out, is follow up on leads. When I was there in 2001, the guy in Katowice said, well, you've got to go meet this guy, Marek Łomnicki, who's the curator at the Museum of Photo History that's in Krakow. And I went and met him. He was very nice. He spoke amazing English because he had lived in the US for a while. And he said, oh, I love pinhole photography. I've even done some. Someday I'm going to make a pinhole photo show here. And, you know, many people say things like that, and it doesn't always happen. And then one day, a letter came in the mail with all these Polish stamps saying, would you be part of a pinhole show at this museum? And I was thrilled. And they had two Polish photographers, me, and they wanted another American. So I recommended my friend Walter Crump, and I've shown some of his work to my students, or you can find him online. And we went there, and what happened was we became so enchanted with all the pinhole photographers we met that we came back and we said, we've got to have a pinhole photo show with Polish photographers in Boston, and we did, and it was crazy. We brought these 7 photographers over for 8 days. We made a catalog. We went to 3 sites. It was absolutely wonderful. It was a huge amount of work. But sometimes artists curate shows. That's another way to interact with other artists and making art. It's a creative act. I couldn't do it all the time. I know that's what Carolyn's doing, you know, putting shows together. But it was really interesting, so I recommend it to you at some point. And many artists make their own shows with other artists. And then I got invited back to Poland and to Poznan in 2007, and they had a great flea market. There's a wonderful Academy of Fine Arts in Poznan. I've actually been studying Polish for about 5 or 6 years now. I can well, I can survive, I'm not fluent, but, you know, it's just been a wonderful thing that's happened, that came about because of my involvement. And then, so they wanted to invite us back, and they invited 8 photographers, and we went to 3 different places, Katowice, Warsaw, Wrocław, and you know, went over a couple of times, gave talks, a lot of us went. It was a big, big adventure. And you know what, I think this is a great thing, especially, I'll make a pitch for, you know, world peace through pinhole photography or through art. Because if you're making pinhole cameras with someone, you're hanging a show with them, you're not gonna send a bomb over. They're not gonna send a bomb over. If you connect over positive things, I think that's wonderful. So, you know, pinhole photography and world peace, I don't know, maybe. But this was one of the shows. If you're interested in pinhole photo, these are all names you can look up who worked with pinhole photo for many years. Here are some of the exhibition invitations. And this is kind of a fun event. Studio Boston na żywo w Warszawie means Boston Studio Live in Warsaw. And this was an event on March 6, 2010 at this wonderful gallery, Galeria Asymmetrical Gallery in Warsaw. My husband and I did. He's actually coming here today. Some of you met him, so you can, I think he's coming around 3. But here he is. His name is Mark Pevsner. He's a composer. And what happened was we met the guy who runs the gallery, Raphael Lewandowski, and we went there, and Mark noticed this, you know, to me it looked like a weird piece of furniture, but Mark saw that it was a harmonium. I don't know if you know what a harmonium is. Don't feel bad, I didn't know, but it's a 19th century organ that you hand pump, and Mark is a pianist, and so he was noticing that, he started to play it. And the gallery owner said, "You will give a concert." and I had admired the windows. I said, "Oh, I'd love to work here." He said, "You will." And the next thing we knew, well, that was in the fall. We came back in the spring, and we did this live event where Mark was playing the harmonium, and I had brought things and I was collaging them. You know, there's nori glue, and you know, working with all these people. And it was wild. People were drinking wine and speaking Polish, and then they'd listen to the music, and there's Mark playing, and as I finished the collages, I would put them up here. And someone actually even bought one, some artist from Amsterdam. It was just the most wonderful event. And, you know, for one night only. And that's the gallery director, Raphael, we're just talking. And it just was an amazing event. You know, I'll never forget it. And I like this picture of my hands because, you know, I really think hands are important. As we're working with computers, I hope we don't forget our hands. I mean, this, you know, I always make this pitch, but I think for humans to work with their hands is really important, and artists know that. Okay, this is a little bit just how I work in my studio. This is an 8x10 pinhole camera. Here's an 8x10 film holder. And these are a little bit staged photos. I had someone take them. It's a little bit like Julia Child. Now I'm going to butter the toast, you know. But it's helpful if you don't know how it's done. And here I am putting the film holder. It goes in the back of the camera. And here are my windows, you know, the light coming in. And, okay, now you might be noticing I'm kind of aiming the camera. I really don't know what I'm going to get. And that's, well, a vague idea, but not really, because there's no viewfinder. I mean, this is a very primitive imaging device, just a box with a little tiny hole, but it does work. And there are plenty of examples out there. So this is how I would set something up, and then, you know, taking off the lens cap. Okay. And here's the camera, and it's, you know, propped up on a piece of wood. And, you know, I have Post-its everywhere to tell myself how long the exposure is, just to remind me later when I am developing it. And then when I'm printing the film, printing the images, what I do, you know, just like the students did in the class, I mix up some cyanotype. It's a very simple 19th century photo method. Artist paper, tape it down, hand coat it, let it dry. I'm turning artist paper into photo paper essentially. It's a non-silver, it's an iron-based process. Then I'm taking a big negative out, 8x10, as a contact printing. My image will be as big as the negative. Then I put it in the contact printing frame, and this is a little piece of acetate. I always put a piece of acetate between my negative and the sensitized paper because I don't want to risk ruining my negative. And then I put it in an exposure unit, UV exposure. You could use the sun. A lot of people here were using the sun, or you can use a unit. You have one downstairs. And after it has been exposed in there, the material changes from that lemony yellow color to this kind of brownish grayish, and you can see this faint image from the negative. And then you develop it in running water, and there it is. And then you put it in an oxidizing bath with hydrogen peroxide, which a lot of people in the room have done, and it makes it darker. And then you hang it up to dry, and then you can just see what they look like. And then they darken slightly as they dry. You pick the one that you think works best. And that's what the image looks like at the end. I think this is the last one. No, it's not the last one. Sorry. Am I going on too long? How long is this supposed to go?
You're
okay.
good.
All right, I'll keep going. I'm putting you to sleep. Okay, so Carolyn mentioned this show in England. I don't know if you guys have heard of Fox Talbot, William Henry Fox Talbot. For people not involved in photo, he's one of the main people credited with the invention of photography, and he invented the idea of positive negative photography with paper negatives, and certainly changed my life. I couldn't do what I'm doing if he hadn't done this work in the 1830s. And they have a wonderful museum there. This is an old barn from the 16th century. And they have an ongoing exhibit of all his cameras and materials. And then upstairs they have an exhibition area, and they only have 2 shows a year, so the shows are up for 6 months. It's kind of low key. And then you come up these stairs, and you can see how funky and old everything is. And so this is as if you were going. You get to see it. And I thought this was fun. They took one of my images and blew it up and printed it on silk, which I really liked the way it looked. And so this is if you're walking around, and he put a nice quote on the wall, and he had pictures of pinhole cameras, and he took some of those pictures of my studio, and he just gave it a nice context. And then this, I think, is very funny. He asked to borrow, when I say he, I'm sorry, that's Roger Watson. He's the curator of the museum. He said, "Can I borrow your 4x5 camera?" So I sent it to him, so it was sitting there for 6 months. He made this kind of fake Jesseca Ferguson setup, and then when I got him, he's got books. It's all very neat. It's very logical. I would never make an arrangement like this, but I got a kick out of it. And then I said, "Roger, you didn't take out the dark slide." So in other words, he had it set up as if it were photographic, but if you work with film holders, you have to take out the dark slide to expose the film. So he had forgotten that part. But anyway, I got a kick out of it. He's a very nice person. He's American. And what was nice, you saw this just in pieces. I later glued it up, and they actually acquired this, so it's in their collection. So that makes me very happy because, that place has a great meaning for me as a photographer or person working in photography. These are some of the other images or collages that were there. And that's the image that was printed on silk. And Louise Nisbet, who's here, has a series she calls Winter Garden. And I said, I have a piece called Winter Garden, and this one is called Winter Garden. So I wondered, that's funny that you would use the same name. And I think this is the last image. I'm fond of this little bird skeleton. Okay, so that is it. I hope you'll ask me some questions. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
Have you ever considered going to thrift stores to find interesting stuff?
Yes, that is a great suggestion. I love thrift stores.
Because that's what I